Hello, everyone. Welcome back after lunch. I hope you had a really restful break. We are super excited to have you here and to hold space for a talk that hopefully fits into the larger conversation about the future of the adoption of Wasm, which we heard all throughout this conference, different ideas, hopes, dreams for. And earlier today, actually, very conveniently for us, Steve Manuel mentioned some of the obstacles for the wider adoption of Wasm. And so in this half an hour, we would like to just focus on one of them that actually wasn't that fleshed out during that talk, which is just to talk about how to make Wasm more approachable so that it serves, the purpose of the wider adoption. But before we begin, let's do some introductions.
Yes, thank you all so much. It is my esteemed joy to introduce Philippe Charrière.
Thank you. Hello.
Senior CS.
Hello.
Thank you. Senior CSC at GitLab. You might remember him from such talks as yesterday's. I'm very, very grateful to Philippe because he has helped in large ways to make WebAssembly more approachable for me. By reading his book, the Wasm Cookbook with Golang.
Yes, but the book is too old, so don't buy it. I plan to write something with Go, Rust, probably Grind too, but this one, stop to buy it, please.
You're being very humble.
When I read it last year, it was wonderful. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Philippe.
Thank you to you.
Mm-hmm. And Oscar Spencer, who will be speaking later on today. Oscar is a co-creator of Grain, an easy-to-use functional language for Wasm, and the director of Suborbital, which is a company that builds products that leverage Wasm.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing to be here, to see all of your faces. I mean, this feels like my family, so it's amazing to be here with all of you.
Cool, but who are we? I'd love to introduce Sylwia. Sylwia is running developer relations at StackBlitz, which is, which is an online IDE that runs Node.js inside browsers, and just honestly, a really solid human being, really cares about community and inclusivity and inspires me to be better.
Oh, wow. Now I just need to take a moment.
Top that.
No. Well, thank you, Ramon. So this is Ramon, Ramon Huidobro, who is a senior developer advocate at Suborbital. You already heard the name of that company. He's also a DevRel consultant and a developer education enthusiast. And a fun fact about Ramon is that this is his birthday, so please a round of applause. Woohoo!
Thank you.
Should I sing? No.
You can if you want. I'm not going to say no.
It
Maybe
would
later?
be an error.
We can have karaoke later on. Okay, so now that you know who is here, I would also like to add another layer of the introductions. You know already what the folks are bringing to the table, what perspectives they are bringing to the table. However, I would also like us to maybe talk a little bit about our journey to Wasm. So why are you here? How did that happen? Oscar, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in college, I was a little bit of a compiler nerd, just really loved languages, looking at that sort of thing. And it was 2017. WebAssembly had just been turned on by default in all major browsers. And I was like, oh man, this is hotness. This is what we should be paying attention to right now. And so at the time, I'd been working on a toy language, still a toy language. I've been working on a toy language. It targeted x86 at the time. And I said, hey, I grabbed my friend and I said, hey, let's make this thing target WebAssembly. And back then, the Wasm spec was actually written in OCaml, and so was the compiler. Oh, wow. So all we had to do was target the spec to make it compile to WebAssembly. And so we got that working in a day. And we managed to attach a Wasm function to a DOM node event listener. And we freaked out. It was just so exciting to see that happen. And now it's been almost 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
This sounds really amazing. Philippe, do you want to tell us?
It's a little bit different. It was 2 years ago, I think, during my summer vacation, not so far from here. I was in Cambrils. And I started to learn Golang and Wasm inside the browser. And every day I post my progress on Twitter. And at a moment, Connor X from Suborbital pinged me, asking me to write a blog post for him. I said, whoa. And after that, he presented me Atmo, another Wasm framework, but on the backend side. And it started like that. I learned a lot of things. I start my old book now. And I did some progress with Golang. I didn't know at this moment the WASI specification, so it was a pure discovery for me. And now I'm totally addicted with this.
Okay. So we have a compiler addict, we have a total addict, and Ramon.
So, thank you. I would say I'm kind of still starting out my WebAssembly journey. And I just want to give a quick shout out to this community because y'all are so inclusive and friendly and kind, and you make this real easy to get into. So thank you for that. I had been hearing about WebAssembly. You know, I was mostly from I'm going to give a small shout out to my colleague and dear friend Flaki, who loves talking at me about WebAssembly. And, you know, I've been hearing from him and some of the communities he's in, and also, you know, from the conferences I was going to would occasionally have WebAssembly talks. And so I'd been hearing about it on the sidelines, but it really took off when I joined Suborbital as a developer advocate, that I read Philippe's book, I read, and I was mentioned yesterday, Brian Sletton's WebAssembly book as well. These two resources really helped me sort of like come to grasp with it, and doing a little bit of tutorials has also done that for me. So how about you, Sylwia?
Well, we are similar in some regards. Well, so I'm kind of new in tech. I'm what you call a person of non-traditional background. I take that all three of you actually have some, most probably, degree in computer science. You don't?
I do not.
I thought that's what you said the other
I
day.
do not, no.
Okay. Well, okay. So what do you have?
I mean, my bachelor's degree has been going on for...
Okay, never mind. It's your birthday. Let's get you off the hook. Anyway, so I'm kind of new in tech. And so when I joined Stack Blitz, you know, all of a sudden I learned that, well, first of all, that you can run Node.js in the browser, which we do. Then I also learned that the web has actually 4 languages and not 3 languages. Now, my prior background is actually linguistics, so you already see that when I hear like 4 languages, I'm like, okay, bring it on. So I got super excited, and I just wanted to nerd out about that. And then it turned out that, oh God, I was really struggling. It's it seems like, you know, all the definitions that are out there are just written by and for people who really speak fluent English, and I'm not a native speaker, and who either have a lot of experience in tech or who maybe finished some degree in programming, right, in computer science. And so, yeah, this is how I started, for example, watching Oscar's videos, and also Ramon's interviews with Flaki, who was already mentioned. And I also have been leveraging, you know, the huge generosity of my colleagues, you know, at my team, whom, for example, yesterday you met Roberto Vidal, who was speaking here earlier. And so, you know, I just feel like while I want to really learn, it's really just like a patched knowledge. Yeah, so the definitions and the general, like, general discourse around Wasm has been a struggle for me.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to touch on as well.
Yeah.
But listen up, folks. This is this is a panel discussion, but it's also an interactive one. So here's the thing. I brought these little treats from Vienna, nougat wafers. If somebody is feeling brave and would like to give us, like we've just done now, their introduction to WebAssembly, their journey, feel free to ask for a mic, and you'll also get one of these. Anybody feeling up for it? It's okay if not.
Do it.
Do it, do it.
And the chocolate is very good.
Oh, you liked it?
Yes.
Fantastic. It's cool. We'll move on. Like, if you change your mind, don't worry.
They can raise their hand.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So let's talk about that, because like one thing that I often find when I'm engaging with folks, and like they're, I tell them, I work with WebAssembly. They're like, oh, I want to get into WebAssembly, but I'm very overwhelmed. Like and you were talking about this too, Sylwia, where they start reading about bundles and bindles and Wazzer, Wazero, Wasmer, like all of this stuff, and I'm like, and this happens to me too, huh? Like I go like, whoa, slow down. And we've seen a little bit about how like, especially as we talk about like, some folks have said, that WebAssembly is kind of like the fourth language of the web, which when compared to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, WebAssembly tends to be like, okay, WebAssembly is the fourth language of the web. Here is like 30 rabbit holes to go down into like understanding stacks, heaps, like, memory management, runtimes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wasm can be difficult to define, especially in an approachable way for those who are not experienced in it, or non-technical people in tech, or even emerging developers. So how can we approach defining it, number one? And actually, we asked on Twitter online, didn't get any replies, which is totally fine, because I think it kind of speaks to how challenging that is. Philippe, I'd love to know from you, what are some of the ways that we can make this more approachable to define for those not in the know?
About the definition, I don't know, because even each time I have to define it at a conference or a meetup, it's difficult for me because I haven't the skill for low-level programming. So I try to make things simpler. I'm a normal developer or a simple developer. I'm not the appropriate term, but from my perspective, there is two ways to learn Wasm. The easy way and the hard way. The easy way is to start with Wasm in the browser, with Golang or Rust, because the tool set are very well done, so it masks all the complexity of Wasm. Or if you prefer the backend part, you can use some framework like E2Core, like Spin from Fermion, for example, because all the complicated things are already done. So it's a good way to start with Wasm and Wazi. And if you want to go deeper, you can start the hard way, and it's not so hard, but my advice would be to start with Wasero runtime, for example, because they provide some very ready-to-use sample. Because my first difficulty when I discovered Wazi was to pass a string as an argument to a function and return a string as a value. And on the documentation, they said it's not possible. Yeah. So, wow. And with the sample of Wasero, for example, I learned how to do this. Or you can use the documentation of the Wasm Edge runtime. There are a lot of examples with Rust, Go, C, C++, and perhaps other language, but it's all very well explained. And I needed some blog posts to understand things, so I read, I think, all the blog posts of, sorry if I don't say the name correctly, of Radu Matei from Fermion. It was a little bit long to read for me because of my skills, but I learned a lot. So thank you for the blog post. It was perfect. And after, Yes, you have to read a lot of things. But don't be afraid to start even with the hard way. Does it make sense?
Very much so. Thank you so much. Sylwia, you and I
It
have
scares me a little bit that you say that the easy way means start from Rust. I mean, I just never heard a sentence that combined easy and Rust, but hey, we are at the forefront of innovation here, so yeah. Sorry, Ramon?
No, thank you. No, that's an excellent point. But yeah, Sylwia, you and I have been talking about this a lot as well. So I know you have lots of thoughts on this. I'd love to hear what your approach would be.
Well, I'm not yet at a point of really giving recommendations.
Sure.
I am at a point of really flailing my arms, trying to stay above the water. So as Ramon earlier said, a little bit of context. I run developer relations at StackBlitz, and StackBlitz uses Wasm. This means that I have to liaison a lot between StackBlitz and people who are, for example, product managers who literally don't know, many of whom literally don't know anything about Wasm. And so, that puts me in a difficult position where I am asked, what is Wasm? Why do you use it? Do you recommend it? This actually paved the way into a very comfortable consultancy gig that I rejected out of, being self-aware. But the thing is that there is a huge need right now for people who explain what Wasm is in a non-complex terms, right? And so this is because the demographic target audience has already grown. So there are more people who are hearing the buzzword Wasm, and they want to quickly assess whether this is a good fit for them or not. It seems, judging by the state of the internet, that we are not yet ready for that. There aren't too many materials that are really friendly for low technical folks or maybe non-technical. Which actually brings me to a very, I think, a quote from you, Oscar, if I can put you on the spot. Brace yourself. Here comes the quote. No. So in one of the interviews, there was an interview with Oscar, an article about WebAssembly adoption. It was in the Newsstack, and you all should read it. And Oscar actually at some point said, you said, ultimately Wasm is just a compiler target. At the end of the day, it's an implementation detail. And if Wasm does its job right, in a few years, it's not going to be a huge of a buzzword. And so I really like that, especially also that today we had a really good talk from Dan Goman about WASI. And so I like what you said in that interview, that it is a little bit of kind of reality for some use cases, but for many use cases it is aspirational, maybe. So would you like to expand more on the implementation detail thing and also your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Because when we talk about getting people into WebAssembly, let's take a step back for a moment. If someone said, hey, I want to run this program, and you said to them, oh, go read these docs on x86. That sounds ridiculous, right? That sounds insane. And yet, here we are, and we're kind of doing that, right? And so when you think about WebAssembly in this way, you have to realize that this isn't going to be the case for most users. At the end of the day, most users do not care how the code gets run. They just want the code to run. And what we're doing here, trying to make sure that the code runs and make sure we can fit different components together, is fantastic. But I don't think we need to spend so much effort saying, hey, you need to go learn WebAssembly text format. You don't need to do that to learn WebAssembly, right? Or hey, you want to use this runtime in your app. It shouldn't be the case that you have to go figure out how to pass a string, right? We're here working on that tooling to make it easy for developers to use this stuff where it makes sense for them. And so I love all the work that everyone is doing, in that regard. And so I think around content, I think that's where we really have to focus. I think the Fermion folks do a fantastic job of this, of saying oh, you want to write an app? You want it to be WebAssembly? Here's how you do it. Run these commands. Great, right? That's fantastic. The Xism folks, right? Saying hey, you want a plugin server in your app? Here you go. This is how you do it, right? And that's where we really need to focus around WebAssembly, because that's how you bring people in. When you tell them, hey, these are the use cases, this is how you solve it, and I've made it easy for you, that's all they care about.
I like what you're saying. I like hearing this. And so when you say this is how you bring people in, what are the people you have in mind?
I mean, all kinds of developers everywhere, right? Because when you look at JavaScript as a language, why did JavaScript blow up and be so popular? The simple answer is that it was everywhere, right? You don't need much to write JavaScript. If you have access to a laptop or even a phone, you could get started with programming, right? And so when you look at WebAssembly, we have an opportunity to do the same thing. We want WebAssembly to run everywhere. You know, so many of us here, you know, aren't even doing Wasm in the browser. We're doing Wasm everywhere else, right? And so I think we just really have to look at it from that perspective of like, hey, literally anyone can use this as long as we give them the tools and make it easy for them to do so.
Thank you for this. So you said any kind of developer, and so how do we bring people in who are not developers, but are the decision makers in tech?
That's tough. Yeah, I mean, that's really tough. I mean, even in, you know, my day job, where we're trying to get people to use WebAssembly, for, you know, not to talk too much about, you know, what we do, but with our product, it's all about, hey, you have an application, let your users write code to program it, right? And so when I can talk to non-technical, you know, folks at companies and say, hey, that 2-year roadmap you have, you can just tell your customers to write the code themselves. And then you see this wheel start turning, and they say, oh, snap, that sounds fantastic. Do they really care how that happens? No. Do they care that it's secure and that you can actually do it and not screw over your business? Absolutely, right? And so when you can tell them the story of, hey, WebAssembly has sandboxing, WebAssembly has this great security model, right? When you can tell that story, it makes a lot of sense to those folks, right? We don't have to get into the low-level, you know, details. I don't have to tell them about my favorite you know, Wasm instructions. Like, that's not going to be the thing that, you know, gets
Not
done.
initially, at least. I like that you mentioned that, you know, about telling the story, because I feel like this is really missing right now. And I think that in the talk that I referred to earlier, Steve Manuel's talk, one of the things that he mentioned as obstacles for adoption are, you know, the clear use cases. And so that's one part, but the other part is also how these use cases, you know, are later on translated into stories, because it's the stories that really resonate with people and that get people excited to learn and, you know, go through the trouble of learning difficult technology and difficult languages. So yeah, so I just wanted to emphasize just a tiny bit of what you said there. And I also know that, Ramon, you also have some thoughts on that. So let's tie back to the fact that this is your birthday. And so, you know, usually you get to make a wish. So I would like you to use your wish. No. If you had one wish for Wasm to, you know, to happen, for anything to happen with Wasm, ecosystem or community, so that it would become, you know, maybe friendlier for beginners or maybe just more approachable, what would that be?
That's a lot of pressure. No. Thank you. You know, it's really important to emphasize that so much work has gone into making WebAssembly as approachable as it is today, and it is extremely approachable. And I think the work that can be done to make it more approachable is happening when we're holding events like this, when we're having discussions like this, when Sylwia and I sit down and think about what it is that we can do ourselves to make WebAssembly more approachable for folks who are looking in, because like from my experience coming from a more front-end JavaScript world, I see a lot of people looking at something like WebAssembly as they would something like, say, React.js, and go like, oh, I'm going to learn WebAssembly the way I would React. And I think like that disconnect, and I know that because it happened to me too, that I was like, yeah, I'll just learn WebAssembly. And like, and it's not, and I think it took me until I was working at Suborbitals actually for a little bit to realize like, hold on, this implementation detail concept, when it clicked, I was like, oh, yeah, it's not something you go and learn. And I think that communication is something that we can definitely, you know, bring more to the table. And like, you know, putting a lot of work into that communication is something that's really important. And I think from that, what we would really benefit from is having a more diverse perspective from, come into WebAssembly as a community. Have folks with like, I'm a big fan of like, I spend a lot of time with emerging developers, and what I love is when they bring that sort of diverse perspective, especially with, say, career switchers who are like, oh, I can't become a developer at this age. I was like, no. You bring that mechanical engineering experience, you're going to see how you're going to change the game, believe me. And I think the same can be done for WebAssembly. And I think this is something that's really important to do. To that note, I am going to plug something. Actually, so just as we were preparing for this and just as we were talking about it, Sylwia and I actually started a very, very initial stages, what we're calling a Wasm glossary. And just sort of like putting it out there as like hey, folks who are getting into WebAssembly especially, come and talk to us, come and opine, come give your opinions, like change the game with us so that we can like make it more approachable. And I think, having that sort of open invitation is something that I think is going to help us loads.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if you go to WebAssembly page, this is the definition you have to wade your way through. Wasm is a binary instruction format for a stack-based virtual machine. It's designed for portable compilation target for programming languages, enabling deployment for on the web for client and server applications. I can tell you this is not a beginner's-friendly definition. So if you have hot takes, opinions, or ideas on how to make it still correct but friendly for people who maybe don't know all those words, just hit us up and let's bring some glossary up. It's the chocolate time now.
Oh. Can you
hear me? Is this
no.
Yes.
There we go.
All right. So on one hand, we're talking about WebAssembly is this implementation detail that most people should know about. On the other hand, we're talking about like, let's bring in beginners, let's have glossaries, and let's have a WebAssembly.org which is approachable. It feels like these are kind of contradictory, right? Like on one hand, like we need to reach this big audience. On the other hand, we don't want to reach this big audience because of implementation detail. So are these conflicts, or is there a way to resolve these two things?
This is something that I've thought about a little bit. Because especially like as a compiler person, begging people to contribute to my project, I want people to understand WebAssembly at a very deep level and come in and fix bugs. I would absolutely love that. And so I think we need to make the distinction of having content for different kinds of audiences. Like we need to have a set of content that is, hey, you want to get into WebAssembly, you're just interested in seeing how it's going to make your app better, versus, hey, I'm like super hardcore, I want to write WebAssembly by hand, or like I'm trying to write something super custom with it that's going to be deployed at the edge and it's going to be super fast and whatnot. And we have to make that distinction and make sure we're calling that out up front so people understand what they're getting into when it comes to documentation.
That's something that I also feel very strongly about, but also another thing is today's beginners are, the developers who will be shaping the web in a few years. And so if we are already talking about Wasm as something that is, so complex that it is unattainable, I mean, like, it's the wide adoption that we were talking about here all throughout the conference is going to be extremely hard, because we are just already preparing people that, oh, it's too difficult for you, right? And when I'm talking about beginners, I'm both thinking about new developers, but I'm also thinking about Wasm, beginners. And I see that even developers with a lot of experience, they see the definition or they see some of the conversation, they're like, okay, I'm good, I will wait I will wait this one out, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Philippe, I want to give you the opportunity if you have any thoughts on that as well.
To make it simpler?
Or how these ideas contradict, and yeah.
For me, Wasm, not as a hardcore developer, just a user or developer user of Wasm, is, if I had to give a simple definition, would be Wasm is like Java. It's the same mechanism. for the usage, but you can use a lot of language, and it will run faster. And then after with the framework, you can work like if you work with Java or Node.js or other program. And the most important thing is that the project need to think to do a very clear documentation with samples, but samples that you can use since the first time.
Thank you. So folks, we are just on the mark, but I just want to, before we leave, I hope folks, the organizers don't get mad at me. I'd love to let us go with asking real short, if you have a favorite WebAssembly educator, Philippe, if you'd like to.
For me, it's not a real answer. It's the community. Go to the Discord of each project and ask even silly question.
Yeah.
It's surprising, but every time I have an answer.
That is such an annoyingly good answer. I love it. How about you, Oscar?
Yeah, I think it is an interesting concept because I think we do need more people educating in WebAssembly and making it clear from both perspectives. From a like, hey, and I'm a part of that, right? Like I should be doing more content, and I always say that I will, time, right? But that's the way it is. But we can't beat ourselves up too much about it. WebAssembly is still early. Yeah, it's been forever, but it's still early, all things considered, right? So this is the time, especially on the brink of the component model, that we can make a difference.
I like that. That would be a great soundbite,
How about you, Sylwia?
Yes, for me, well, I already have given a shout out to Oscar, Flaky, and Ramon, and also Roberto, who presented yesterday. Especially, I don't know how many of you speak Spanish here. I hope many. Roberto's talks in Spanish actually really helped me just get started with orienting myself in WebAssembly. So go check Roberto Vidal's talk. And also, I just wanted to mention, because we are talking about beginners, there's actually about to be launched an interactive tutorial, Wasm interactive tutorial for beginners where the only prerequisite knowledge is JavaScript. And it is a work done by Dominique Elm. So you can follow him on Twitter. I think it's Delm or ElmD. He's encouraging actual beginners, brace yourself, to write Wasm by hand in the browser, just so that they understand the concept. So I myself am really curious about how that's going to go. So it's not about those beginners just going and developing full-blown Wasm stuff. It's just more so that this is a gentle introduction to what Wasm is. So I want to give a shout-out to him as well. Yeah, and Ramon?
Cool. I would say, aside from everybody already mentioned, like I've already mentioned how much your book helped me, how much your guidance has helped me, how much talking to you has helped me. But aside from that, Brian Sletton's book, and I will never, ever stop referring back to Lynn Clark's illustrated guide.
Yeah.
The cartoon guide, it is phenomenal. I'll share a link later. It is so good. So given that we are a little bit over time, I'm going to gently wrap up this discussion. I want to thank the three of you for doing this with us today. I want to thank you all for participating. I'm going to come up to you in a bit and thank you for your question. Small of a challenge. I've got two more if you want to come up to me later and try and define Wasm in an approachable way. So
thank you, Ramon, as well.
Oh, thank you. And thank all of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.